Now there's a lot of drawbacks to using a grid also. It works, but one of the first drawbacks is you have to take the time to draw out all these lines. If you can't draw on your reference image, you have to have a piece of plastic laid over the top, draw the lines there, draw out a grid on what you're intend to draw on. It took me, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes to measure this all out and create my grids. Second drawback is once you've started, you have all these lines on your drawing. Now I didn't bother shading or anything like that, so you either have to erase these lines, but once you start shading over the top of the lines, and say that's the value I want to have, it gets a little more difficult to dig that line out of there. So adding to the amount of time that you've already taken to draw out this grid, you now have to more or less use your gridded drawing as a transfer. Now if you were doing painting, it'd be no big deal because the paint would cover up over the lines, but in this case we'd have to make a transfer, draw on the back, get another sheet of paper, and trace all these lines all over again. Now the biggest drawback to using the grid is that the grid is so logical. In a way, the logic of the grid imposes itself. It's imposing its analytics onto the process of your drawing. It should be a very sensual process of seeing, but a higher order of thinking is involved. You have to analyze these grids and look at everything, and this just isn't the way your eye works. And by using grids, you're not going to improve your accuracy of seeing, eyeballing measurements. You're going to be dependent on the grid. I've seen a lot of people using grids, and still their drawings and their measurements come out all off. And even though the grid is logical and it should work, it's that whole logic, that whole analytics that doesn't work with the way we see. So there's better ways to measure that will improve your accuracy in eyeballing your own measurements and not having to rely on a tool like a grid. In drawing, the only measuring tool you need is already in your hand. I want you to think of a fairly stereotypical image of an artist. They're sitting behind their easel and they have one eye closed and they have an arm stretched out in front of them, and they're kind of waving around with their paintbrush turned around backwards, doing funny things like this with their hands. What that artist is doing is taking measurements. There's two types of measurements that they can be taking that way. One is distance, length, and the other is angle. So I'm going to show you how to use your pencil as a measuring tool. So let's imagine this line is a distance or length we need to measure. Now, to use your pencil as a measuring tool, the tip here, line it up with the end of what you're measuring, and using your thumb, holding your pencil like this, use your thumb to kind of mark where the other end of the line is. So right there, now you have that distance here on your pencil. So in order to measure that, I get a point there, lay this down like this, and wherever the tip of the pencil is, there is your measured distance. Now I said the artist can also be measuring angle. Now to do angle, it's fairly simple. You line your pencil up like that and just move it, and there you have that angle again. So if I wanted to do angle, I'd make a point here as one of my points, take my pencil again, holding that angle, move it over, mark the other end of the angle, connect the two dots, And there we have measurements of distance and measurements of angle using only one tool, the pencil that's already in your hand. There are two types of lines that our eyes and brain can imagine quite accurately. The first is the horizon line. Basically a horizontal line going from left to right, parallel with what we're drawing. Now the reason we can recognize and imagine this so easily is that our sense of balance and orientation is tied with our ability to recognize the horizon. That's why when people get seasick, they're told to go stand out on the deck and look at the ocean, look at the horizon to get their sense of balance back into order. The second type of line that we can imagine quite accurately is a plumb line. Basically, a vertical line going up and down that's perpendicular to the horizon line. Now, it's not so obvious why we can imagine this so easily, but many of us forget that we actually have two eyes, and there's two images being processed by the brain, so where they intersect always creates a vertical or plumb line. Now, these two imaginary types of lines can be used to help you measure. So let's get this guy back out again. And I'm just going to pick an arbitrary point. So I'm going to pick this point right here in the corner of his eye. And I'm going to put that point down here on the paper. And using my pencil to measure, I have like an eyeball here, roughly what is the horizon line. So, like I said before, measuring, and there's a dot, so on that horizon line there's his ear. And I'll take a measurement here, and this dot on that horizon line is the other edge of his eye. And take this little measurement. That's the round of the eye. Take another measurement here. And we have the other side of the eye, so I'll just kind of sketch in these things to make it a little easier to see on the tiny little camera. So already I'm getting some references here. Let's go across using that same horizon line. Gonna have where it intersects over here. Point there on the other part of the eye, and I can just keep taking that line across. Got the other part of the round of the eye. Measuring from that point, it's the other side of the round of the eye. Keep going across. Now let's measure the ear there. And I can keep using that point and finding more important reference spots.